All right, today we're tackling a massive story, a 400-year journey that took the United States from just a few coastal settlements all the way to becoming the most powerful country in modern history.
So really, how did that happen? I mean, think about it. How did 13 small British colonies, pretty much just clinging to the edge of a continent, transform into a global superpower? That's the big question we're digging into. So let's jump right in at the very beginning.
Okay, so our story actually begins before there was even a nation. It starts with an idea, the idea of a new world. This is where we'll look at the first steps, from the moment Europeans arrived to the tensions that started bubbling up and set the stage for something totally new.
The first couple of centuries were just a whirlwind. You've got Columbus showing up for Spain way back in 1492. Then fast forward to 1607, and England establishes its first permanent settlement at Jamestown. But the real game changer? That comes in 1763. See, Britain had just won the French and Indian War, basically securing its hold on the continent. The problem? Winning an empire is seriously expensive. So, to pay off its massive war debts, Britain started taxing its American colonies. And, well, that's when they accidentally planted the seeds of revolution. And believe me, those seeds grew fast. Which brings us to our next big chapter, the birth of a republic. And you gotta understand, this was about so much more than just taxes. This was about creating a completely independent nation, an idea that at the time was not just radical, it was incredibly dangerous.
So how do you even build a country from scratch? Well, here's the basic three-step blueprint. First, in 1776, you write the Declaration of Independence, which is basically the world's most epic breakup letter to a king. Step 2, you actually have to win the war that follows. And finally, step 3, in 1787, you get together and hash out a brand new system of government at the Constitutional Convention. I mean, that's the framework that's still around today.
All right, so with a new government up and running, the young nation immediately turned its eyes to the West. But here's the thing. This period of just incredible growth was also setting the stage for some really deep and ultimately violent internal conflict.
Okay, just look at this number for a second. $15 million. Now put yourself back in 1803, what on earth could that kind of money buy you?
Well, it bought you pretty much half a continent. That $15 million was the price tag on the Louisiana Purchase. This was a deal with Napoleon that literally doubled the size of the United States, like overnight. We're talking one of the greatest real estate deals in all of history, and it just completely unleashed this era of relentless expansion to the West.
But this expansion, it wasn't just about grabbing land. It was powered by this really potent idea called manifest destiny. This was the core belief that the United States was, destined to stretch all the way from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And this philosophy, it wasn't just about fueling wagon trains. It was also the justification for a war with Mexico, which ended with the U.S. taking the territory that would become California, Nevada, Utah, the list goes on.
But here's the tragic irony. As the country got bigger, the cracks inside it just got deeper and deeper, eventually erupting into the American Civil War. And this really breaks down the core conflict. On one side, you had the Union in the North, an industrial economy, mostly against spreading slavery into those new Western lands. On the other side, you had the Confederacy in the South, an agrarian economy that was completely and fundamentally built on the labor of enslaved people. These weren't just two different economies, they were two different worlds, and they simply could not coexist in one country.
So, after the Civil War forcibly put the nation back together, that old expansionist ish came right back. And this quote here introduces us to the guy behind the next big land deal, Secretary of State William Seward, a man who saw huge potential where pretty much everyone else just saw, well, a giant block of ice.
And yep, that frozen wasteland was Alaska. Now, the really fascinating part here is the why. Why did Russia sell? Well, they were broken and weakened after the Crimean War, and they were genuinely afraid that their rival, Great Britain, might just come in and seize the territory anyway. So they figured, hey, might as well sell it. They offered it to the U.S. for just $7.2 million, a deal that ended up securing American interests in both the Pacific and the Arctic for good.
Okay, so now the U.S. spans the entire continent, from sea to shining sea. The country is whole again. So what's next? Well, now it was ready to start projecting its power beyond its own borders. It was time to step onto the world stage.
And wow, the turn of the 20th century was just a blur of activity. This is when America really announced its arrival as a global power. I mean, look at this. In a single year, 1898, the U.S. defeats a major European empire in the Spanish-American War, and it annexes Hawaii.
Just a few years later, by 1903, it's helping engineer Panama's independence from Colombia for one very strategic reason: to build the Panama Canal, a shortcut that would give the U.S. Navy total dominance over two oceans.
This brand new, much more assertive foreign policy even had a name: gunboat diplomacy. And it was championed by none other than President Theodore Roosevelt. The idea was simple but really powerful. The threat of military force could be just as effective as actually using it. It was basically America's way of saying, "We're here and you need to take us seriously."
So, by the time World War I kicked off in Europe, the transformation was pretty much complete. The United States was officially a world power. And, as we know, the massive conflicts that would define the rest of the 20th century, we're talking 2 world wars and a Cold War, they would forge that world power into a full-blown superpower. So after all that, what does that legacy actually look like today?
Well, to start, it looks a little something like this number: 26%.
And this chart right here is what that 26% is all about. As of today, the US economy accounts for more than a quarter of the entire world's economic output. But look at this next number, which is even more staggering. It's responsible for 40% of all military spending on the entire planet. This right here is the modern reality of a superpower, a status that was built piece by piece over centuries of conflict, expansion, and innovation.
And that brings us right back to where we started. From just 13 colonies trying to survive on the coast to a nation with truly unparalleled power, it has been a remarkable and often turbulent journey. Which leaves us with just one final question: what's the next chapter of this story going to be?